What is the way forward? Whose responsibility is it to bring about a lasting change, a transformation? Blaming others or finger-pointing has not achieved much, while acknowledging the errors of history and some of the unfortunate intricacies of international politics with regards to Africa. Nwachukwu had some hard truths for the Africans, a time for an honest dialogue.
Insulting the Westerners, telling them to their face, yes, I've told them off. After telling them off, you come home, we still have our problems. However kind or understanding the outside world may be or may pretend to be with Africa, it is not going to solve the African problems for us. The foreign policy of every country is primarily designed to promote that country's national interest. Non-African countries will help Africa and Africans to the extent that such help serves their interest. New spirit means new mentality. How do Africans see themselves? If you have no personal esteem, you are not going anywhere. If you do not regard yourself as equal to the task, you are not going anywhere. Look, years of slave trade and of slavery have made Africans think that it is normal for them to be second pipers, such that many Africans prefer less qualified people that are not of the same skin or of the same continent to their own expats that are from the same continent. So you do not esteem, you don't have the self-esteem. Let us try in our educational system to inculcate self-esteem.
It is important to note the efforts of continental institutions like the African Union and other regional bodies in dealing with the huge challenges that have hindered development. There is a determined search for African solutions to African problems.
I think it's very important to recognize that Africa has today an extremely sophisticated concept of political and economic integration and an institutional framework that is indeed remarkable.
The new Partnership for Africa's Development, NEPAD, a grand plan of the African Union, is a comprehensive blueprint and socio-economic program to combat corruption and implement essential actions to ensure Africa's socio-economic development.
If you look at the African Union and the way it is built, with its Peace and Security Council, with all its mechanisms defined, of course, in law, in international law. If you look at African refugee law, that is better than the convention. If you look at what it is today, the African Court for Human and People's Rights. If you look at the concept of economic integration by regions, and then with the NEPAD as a framework for economic integration and development at the level of the African continent. And the fact African countries have accepted a mechanism of peer review that, of course, represents a clear commitment to improve its development and the quality of its institutions. We all acknowledge that the problem is not lack of a conceptual framework. The problem is not even lack of strategy. The problem is that the conditions for implementation are just not there. And the conditions for implementation are just not there by a large extent for lack of support of the international community and for lack of resources to implement what has been decided.
You can argue about many of our challenges and problems and weaknesses in the continent. But the one thing you have to admit, the continent has become better over the last 7 years to make its own peace and to give substance to this idea of African solutions to African problems.
On the ground, it is the ordinary people who are the champions. From Cape to Cairo, from the coast of Senegal to the shores of Somalia, stories abound of Africans making a difference in every sphere of life. From the plenary sessions, workshops, and dialogue groups came many such stories. Lillian Singo, manager of the Pelopepper Health Train that travels across South Africa, delivering essential health care to the rural population. Achieving health security is one of the pillars of sustainable development in Africa.
This train is about teamwork. This train is about sharing. This train is about caring. This train is about working together. Even the very beginning, it was started by a Rand Afrikansman who did a thesis in blindness in South Africa and realized that a lot of rural people were blind from conditions that could be treated. So he went to a railway company, asked if they could build him a train so that final year students could go and prevent blindness. From there, it became 4 coaches. When I joined it, it was 13 coaches. We went to rural areas and we found that there were no dentists, no dental educators, and people were coming with dental problems and we didn't have a dental department. So we had to go in back and ask Colgate and Palmolive. So even though Transnet, the railway company, takes charge of the finances, we've had to ask a lot of other sponsors and organizations to support us.
Marguerite Barenkitse from Burundi spoke of her work with 10,000 orphans of an ethnically motivated genocide. Her story demonstrated the power of love over the politics of separation on ethnic lines. Betty Bigombe from Uganda works with an international financial institution, but for many years she has served as the chief negotiator between the government of Uganda and the Lord's Resistance Army. She describes the war in northern Uganda and condemns the commercialization of war.
The war in northern Uganda has been described by United Nations Under-Secretary for Humanitarian Affairs, Jan Egeland, as the world's worst forgotten emergency. Commercialization of wars. I've seen it in mediation. I've seen how local people also start saying, I have contact with rebels, and the next thing is somebody is funding them, and then when it turns out that what they're doing is not real, and that sources die out, they start undermining the others. I've seen how it's becoming an industry, how people believe this is one way of getting big names, how people believe this is one way of getting easy funding.
Farmers from East and Southern Africa shared their commitment to making Africa achieve food security.
Food security is vital to progress and liberation, vital to political progress and to spiritual liberation. This is what I truly believe. When you feed your family, you can hold your head up and you win back your dignity. If you can manage to feed the whole country, you've got economic independence. When you help your neighbors to feed their families, as the train is doing, you build the trust that ends the wars, right?
I train the farmers in rainwater harvesting methods like roof catchment, runoff catchment, and the use of shallow wells for domestic and also for small irrigation projects. I also train the farmers on the need to network with other farmers from different parts of the country through networking organizations. Like we have one called Arid Farms, Arid Lands Network. Through these methods, I have been able to help and change my rural community for the better. If we are to change Africa for the better, we need to start right at the grassroots.
Due to conflict or economic reasons, many Africans are forced to live in diaspora. One inspiring story is that of a Sierra Leonean refugee living in Denmark as a bus driver. He initiated a training program called Moral Foundation for Democracy, designed to rebuild trust between the police, the military, and civil society in his home country, Sierra Leone.